My truth is, I sold the house, my brother-in-law Kevin confessed. My husband and I were left speechless, unable to process what we'd just heard. But the most shocked of all was my mother-in-law. Why? How could you do something like this? Weren't you supposed to come and get me? My mother-in-law was visibly upset, her voice rising as she confronted Kevin. Please calm down, Kevin urged, trying to soothe her before beginning to explain his reasons. My name is Sandra, and my husband Robert and I both work remotely. We enjoy the flexibility of our work, taking breaks whenever we need them. It was a peaceful arrangement that suited us perfectly, until my mother-in-law moved in. Financially, we were secure, so we didn't mind helping her out. But it wasn't long before her disapproving looks began. Why aren't you two going out to work? She would ask, clearly unimpressed. Her constant questioning felt like a heavy weight on my shoulders, as if history was repeating itself. When she first started questioning us, we explained that we were working remotely, but she wasn't convinced. It looks like you're just playing around. I've told Robert the same thing. Are you even listening to me? When are you both going to start working properly? Don't you care about your future? No matter how many times we tried to explain our situation, my mother-in-law refused to understand. Oh, I'm so worried, she would sigh dramatically. Maybe I made a mistake coming here. I should have gone to Kevin's house instead. The Kevin she spoke of is Robert's brother. He married a wealthy woman named Carol, and now he seems to be living off her fortune. My mother-in-law had no idea about this. Kevin had asked us not to tell her. Kevin's house isn't small like this one. It's huge like a foreign castle. I'll eventually move to Kevin's place, and it'll be my house, my mother-in-law would often say, holding out hope that Kevin would come and get her. But we knew that day would never come. Robert had once suggested to his brother, who their mother doted on, that she could live with him. Kevin, however, flatly refused to live with their mother. So she stayed with us, and though she called us unemployed for working remotely, we learned to tolerate her comments. But then something happened that made it impossible to keep enduring the situation. Out of the blue, we got a call from Kevin. I'll be coming over this weekend, he said, hanging up before we could respond. What do we do? I asked, feeling uneasy. Kevin hasn't changed a bit, Robert said, equally baffled. Our conversation caught my mother-in-law's attention, and she leaned in with a look of pure delight. He's coming to pick me up. Help me get ready to move, she said, dragging Robert off to her room. He looked troubled. Mom, Kevin's not coming to pick you up. He probably called because something happened. But she snorted, clearly unconvinced. That can't be true. But he didn't say anything about picking you up, did he? He just didn't mention it. Robert, I'm tired of this house. You probably want me to be your housekeeper, but that's not going to happen. We couldn't understand why she was so paranoid. Since moving in, she had done nothing around the house, getting up whenever she wanted and living off the allowance we provided. We weren't about to force her to stay, so we packed her bags as she requested and waited for Kevin to arrive. Over the weekend, my brother-in-law and his wife showed up at our house. As soon as they walked in, they wore unnervingly ingratiating smiles. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. At that moment, my mother-in-law appeared, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. You finally arrived, she said, her voice dripping with feigned sympathy. Sandra is completely hopeless with house chores, so I have to handle everything, and Robert ignores me. Isn't that awful? She made her way past Robert and welcomed her brother into our home. Are you mistreating Mom? Kevin asked with a concerned look. Of course not. We give her an allowance and let her eat whatever she wants. Sandra handles the housework, Robert replied, his expression showing his frustration. Kevin, however, looked doubtful. Robert's always been a bit clueless, probably mistreating Mom without even realizing it. And Sandra doesn't seem very considerate. Exactly, Kevin really understands me. Hearing this, Robert and I exchanged frustrated glances. Despite our irritation, we decided to play the gracious hosts and led the couple to the living room. We all sat around the coffee table with Robert and me on one side and Kevin and his wife on the other. Now, what are you just sitting there for? Serve the tea, my mother-in-law ordered. I thought you were going to make the tea, mother-in-law, I replied. The couple exchanged worried glances, and I imagine our expressions were a mix of frustration and resignation. With no other options, we reluctantly agreed to let them stay temporarily, but we insisted they move out within a month. Kevin agreed with a laugh and went off to prepare their things for the move. After they left, my mother-in-law sat in silence, deep in thought. Robert and I figured she was still processing the shock. The next day, the couple's belongings arrived in a massive load. All this, where are we going to put it all? We might need to sell some of it or rent a storage unit, I said, struggling to find space for Kevin's things. That's when my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. I've been thinking, if Kevin stays here, we'll be more secure in the future. So, you two freeloaders can leave, right? Robert and I were stunned by her sudden declaration. If you're insistent on this, I could tolerate Robert staying, but I don't want a wife who's useless. Get a divorce. Then Sandra's space can be used for all this stuff, she said eagerly, her eyes gleaming as she looked to my husband for confirmation. What are you talking about? Robert exclaimed, his disbelief evident. Just then, my brother-in-law and his wife arrived. My mother-in-law greeted them with enthusiasm despite my lingering shock over her earlier comments. Robert chose to set aside his concerns for the moment and asked Kevin to sort out the piles of packages. There's more here than I expected. Try to reduce the number, rent a storage unit, or sell some if necessary, Robert instructed. Kevin shot him a sharp look. What are you talking about? These are important items. How could I sell them? And what if they get stolen from a storage unit or damaged? Are you going to take responsibility for that? Robert shook his head at his brother's selfishness. This is our house, after all. It's only fair that you endure some inconvenience. If you don't like it, find somewhere else to stay quickly and move out. At that moment, my mother-in-law interjected loudly. What are you talking about? Didn't it just say that if you two are unhappy with Kevin and the rest, you can leave? You're just freeloaders here. We don't need you. Kevin is trying to start a business, and all you do is hang around, doing so-called remote work. You're a nuisance. She spoke as if the house were hers. Robert and I exchanged stunned looks, while my brother-in-law and his wife looked taken aback at first, but then their faces broke into smirks. That might not be a bad idea. Mom, you're right. It's a hassle to find a new place, so we could just stay here. So, sell this house to us, right, Carol? Kevin suggested with a smirk. I'd feel more comfortable if you two weren't around, so it would be helpful if you sold us this place. Besides, it seems like Mom is on our side, Carol added, making my husband and me gape in disbelief. What nonsense are you talking about? Robert began, but was cut off by my mother-in-law, who gloated, See? Both Kevin and Carol are in agreement. So what will you do, Robert? If you're getting a divorce, you can stay here. She looked at me triumphantly. I prepared to respond, but Robert spoke up first. Why are you making demands like this? Why should Sandra have to leave? Robert's face flushed with anger as his voice rose. Don't shout. It's better without a burden around, isn't it? My mother-in-law retorted coldly. You don't get it. This is Sandra's house, Robert said, his tone exasperated. At his words, my mother-in-law, Kevin, and Carol gasped. Robert continued, adding to the tension, This is the house Sandra bought for us to build our life together. What? What are you saying? Isn't it the husband's job to buy the house? They responded in disbelief. There's no such rule. Besides, Sandra covers all of Mom's allowance and living expenses. Sandra agreed to take on this responsibility because your pension is minimal, and it would be difficult for you to manage financially on just that, Robert said, glaring intensely at his mother. My mother-in-law looked at me with disbelief and sneered. Unbelievable. Sandra just sits at the computer all day. She doesn't even do housework. Honestly, wasn't my allowance coming from my pension? There's no way Sandra could afford to give me $500 a month otherwise. Besides, she continued, Sandra is managing my pension, right? You might have told Robert otherwise, but I'm sure you're dipping into it. She puffed up her chest and glared at me, but I met her gaze steadily. It's true. I've succeeded as a business owner. You're lying. Divorce this deceitful wife already. You should live here with me, Kevin, and Carol. Besides, there's no proof Sandra's earning money. There is, I said, pulling out my paycheck and showing it to her. The sight of it left my mother-in-law, Kevin, and Carol stunned. We haven't used any of Mom's pension since she moved in. If Mom ever wanted to leave, Sandra has been managing it so she could live independently. But instead, Mom, you've been bossing Sandra around and interfering with her work. You're the problem. If you don't like Sandra, you should leave right now. I don't believe any of this, my mother-in-law shouted. We don't mind if you and Kevin stay temporarily, but patience is expected. We only agreed to this because you begged us, Robert said, glaring at Kevin and Carol. Kevin and Carol broke into a cold sweat, clearly uncomfortable with Robert's raised voice. Just kidding, but you're certainly earning a lot, huh? I'd love to learn some business tricks from you, Carol, Kevin said, trying to lighten the mood. Yes. While we were worried about living with our sister-in-law, it turns out she's not so bad after all, Carol added, both of them smiling at each other. Despite their attempt at friendliness, my mother-in-law remained unyielding. Don't act so high and mighty. You're just a bum. Enough, Robert, you should leave too. Go outside and see how harsh the world can be. Robert and I exchanged weary looks. I tried to intervene, but, well, if that's how you feel, we'll pack our things and move to a new house. You'll be left with a mortgage, but if that's okay with you, don't come crying to us for help later. If you insist, mother-in-law, we'll leave. Even with your pension, maintaining your lifestyle will be challenging, but I suppose that's your problem now. At our words, my mother-in-law turned beet red and yelled at us to get out. Wait, you can't be serious. We don't have to do this, do we? Yes, if you're here, we're safe. Kevin and Carol tried to stop us, but my mother-in-law glared at Kevin and said, "Don't you dare talk back, Kevin. You're going to be a CEO, aren't you? I don't mind you using my pension, so start a company and show us how successful you can become. I'll show you what happens when you defy us." Her words were intense and unyielding. Realizing that it was best to distance ourselves from her and Kevin's family, we decided to leave. We changed the house's ownership to Kevin's name before departing. Some time has passed since then. Despite the residual dissatisfaction from that incident, being freed from my mother-in-law's sarcasm allowed us to resume our normal routine. Just as we were settling into our new routine working from home, my mother-in-law called my husband, her voice trembling with distress. Kevin has taken my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back in a week. Carol and I are left alone, and we're in trouble. Please help us, she sobbed. After my husband calmed her down, he asked for details on Kevin's disappearance. I gave all my pension to Kevin for his startup, but he squandered it on gambling. When I confronted him, he vanished, she explained between tears. Unable to continue through her sobs, she handed the phone to Carol. Please call us back. We can't survive like this. Since Kevin's startup failed and he sold the house we were living in, our parents have cut us off. We haven't been able to reach them, Carol pleaded. Seeing their desperation, my husband muttered in frustration. I knew it. That's unfortunate, but don't involve us. We warned you when we left. Even if you come crying to us, we won't help. Report Kevin missing to the police. It's not our problem. With that, he hung up. I was taken aback, but my husband said, they got what they deserved, and I had to agree. Afterward, they called my husband's cell phone repeatedly. When he finally answered, Carol was in tears, asking how to report Kevin as missing. We were surprised she didn't know how and advised her to contact the police. Despite our initial fears, Kevin remained elusive until we learned he had been arrested for bank robbery in another state. It turned out he committed the crime to settle his debts, and given his history, he was likely facing significant jail time. Carol, unable to return to her parents' home, continued living with my mother-in-law in a house. Whether or not she will divorce Kevin is uncertain, though it seems to be a minor concern compared to her current struggles. She registered with a temp agency and is managing her first job, but it's been a daily challenge for her to make ends meet. My mother-in-law is now grappling with the consequences of Kevin's actions. With her pension depleted, she's left to repay his debts and has taken on part-time work to help manage the financial strain. While my husband and I have expressed sympathy for their plight, we have made it clear that we will not be providing any assistance and have severed all communication with them. They are now experiencing the harsh realities of life that my mother-in-law was always quick to criticize. Despite the upheavals caused by my mother-in-law's move and subsequent events, my husband and I are relieved to have returned to a more peaceful and stable life.